welcome to Miss Johnson's classroom again. I just want to say that I'm very proud of where you guys are to this point. I think you guys are growing as photographers. You're developing really good composition skills, craftsmanship, maintaining your deadlines, and you're really starting to get involved in understanding that it's so much more than taking just a photograph. It's actually diving into what we experience as humans relative to the human condition: happiness, sadness, joy, sorrow, pain, religion, sexuality, political upheaval. All of those things are relative to us. And so now that you've got a good understanding of what a photograph is supposed to do to a community, to an audience, anyone walking into a gallery, now we're going to elaborate more on how they tell stories. So we know that when we take a photo shoot and we relate it relative to the human condition, then we're actually diving into making sure that all of the people who partake in our audience, in our work, get something from it. And now we're just going to take it a step further, and I'm going to allow you to play a little bit, and that playing is going to be through narratives. So narratives are how we tell a story, whether it's literal or visual. There's always different ways to tell a story. And the important thing to remember is sometimes we know, just as teachers or as students, you have that friend or you have that person in your life where they'll start to tell you a story and eventually you just lose them because you're not interested in it anymore. They haven't connected to you in any way, shape, or form. And so we just lose them. And that's the same thing that happens as artists. Sometimes we cannot create a good enough narrative that everyone can partake in and everyone can participate in or feel like they have some type of connection to. So that's actually what you're going to do with your narrative photo shoot. The key that you're going to have to remember is when you're doing a narrative focus shoot, we focus on what is relative to everyone and not essential to no one. By that, I mean you have to pick something that everyone can relate to, whether it's waking up in the morning, crying, eating a bowl of cereal, going to bed at night, the preparations to get to go to church. All of those things that most people are understand or they're familiar with, I should say. When I say essential to no one, only certain people experience certain things in a certain way, in a certain time, things like that. So if you make it too specified, not everyone can take advantage of understanding what your narrative is. So you need to keep that in mind, all right? So as we look forward, let's define what a narrative is. A narrative is a noun. Plural noun is narratives, and it says a spoken or written account of connected events, a story, the hero of the modest narrative. So when you're thinking about writing your narrative visually, so photographing your narrative, they have to be connected, number one, and you have to tell something. It has to tell an event. It has to tell a story or a time. Something needs to be portrayed in that, okay? And remember, everybody has to be able to connect to it. So, for example, some of you travel. Let's say you want to do a narrative where you travel to Paris and go do, I don't know, go to the different museums over there and maybe eat at certain restaurants. Wonderful and great, but not everybody gets to partake in that narrative. The challenge for this assignment is to give me a narrative that everyone relates to. For example, you all know your teacher is not a fan of the Grove and all these Ole Miss games and everything else. I think there's more to life. However, that is a huge narrative in this town. Everybody participates in that. So that would be a good option, whether it's getting the clothes, the tent preparation, the food preparation, what happens after the game, what happens during the game. All of those things would be a part of that narrative that most people in this town would represent. Now, if we were somewhere else, I would say, okay, you can't do that because not everybody relates to that. So you have to find things within the context of the community that you're into that'll help you portray a better narrative. All right, so let's look at some of these narratives. If you look at this narrative over here to the right, you can see that the subject matter is about shaving, but there's a little rock thrown in there. That rock thrown in there in the center part is a human. I mean a female, I'm sorry, and she's shaving a mustache. Now, for most of you, like you'll say, well, men and women, they have different facial features. And typically, yes, females do not have facial features, but sometimes different hormone imbalances, different things like that can lend itself to there. So that is just the narrative that they're telling, okay? Look at the narrative to the left of your screen. The gentleman is smoking, and he's obviously shaking his head about something that he's done. And then the last photograph is the distraught of actually going through with that narrative. So you can fill in the gaps, even though someone hasn't told me line by line, story by story, picture by picture of what has happened in between. I have enough sense to make and fill in the gaps of where those narratives are left out. All right, let's look at another narrative. This is called Things Are Queer. Now, I'm not going to talk about this in terms of helping you to understand whether it's implicit or explicit, and by that meaning there's more that meets the eye that I need to understand. I do want to point out, however, if you look at the top right photograph right over here, obviously he used what, my genius babies? Photoshop. So in your narrative, can you use Photoshop? Yes. I suggest that you use that. Now is the time for you to shine. Show me everything that you've been learning, trying to learn, taking initiatives and going and looking up different techniques on Schoology, YouTube, anything that you want. All I ever ask is that you keep it clean. That's all I ever ask. Keep it clean, guys. I love my job and I love teaching you and I love having you in my classroom. So don't send me anything stupid. Otherwise, you'll go bye-bye. This is just repeated. All right, so now let's look at this narrative. This is a narrative by a high school student, and I'll give you a moment to look at the narrative. So after you looked at the narrative, what comes to mind? Time, the elusiveness of time, and how quickly it's just gone. It's gone. And so the first picture is him racing out the door. The second picture is him running up the sidewalk, still constantly looking back at his watch. The subway, looking back at his watch. So you can see this repeated aspect, looking at the watch to further emphasize the elusiveness of time. And he's looking at clock. It looks like he's in the subway station, and then he's also kind of depressed in the last picture. So I know every single one of you can relate to that, especially understanding that time really doesn't exist at Oxford High School. It's like this, nonstop from the time you get here to the time you leave. And for those athletes, it's still constantly going. And for some of you, it's going even after school because you've got work, you've got siblings to take care of. So there's all these different things that are relating to time that no matter where you're from, socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, culture, anything, you can relate to the fact that we do not have enough time to get everything done. Okay, so let's go back to what I know that we have to do. Okay, I know I have to create a narrative, a spoken or written account of connected events, but in this case, it's going to be a photographed account of connected events. I have to make sure that it is relative to everyone, not exclusive to one. And I need to be able to tell the essential truth. So when you're thinking about a narrative and you're thinking about the essential truths, you're thinking about what is important to tell the story. Sometimes things are just fluff. They're extra ideas, extra information that you don't necessarily need to paint the narrative. And if that's the case, then leave those things out, because that's where you're going to lose your audience. That's where you're going to lose me and everyone else. Remember, you want everybody to be captivated. You want everyone to stay into your narrative. Ohana? Ohana. Okay, good. All right, so now let's talk about what the outcome is. So you're going to do 2 narrative photo shoots. 2? Yes, 2. Get over yourself. You know how I am. You're going to do one that is exclusively going to be in black and white, every single shot. You've got high contrast. You are going to give it a title, and it will be composed of 9 photographs. You have another story, a completely different narrative. Not 2 of the same thing, one in black and white and one in color. Not happening. 2 different narratives. 9 photographs, a title. It will be in color. And again, I want it to have high contrast. When you arrange the narrative, you'll arrange them on one keynote per narrative, just like this is. You see right here, and you've got the 9 shots arranged in the way we should read them. So it is not a genius move to have the very last part of the narrative first. I'm sorry, I can't speak, obviously. We read left to right, top to bottom. And that is the sequence of the narrative that you actually have to put into the photo shoot. All this haphazard stuff will just be a big fat 0 in the grade book by your lovely Miss Johnson. Okay, so we got 2 narratives. You are working on this during your last week of your conceptual studies and your human condition shoot. So I suggest you get it together. Yes, I told you guys I'm starting to turn up the heat. Those photo shoots are going to come one after the other, deadline after deadline. It's about being a professional. It's about learning. And it's about constantly working, constantly growing, constantly taking photographs, because only at that point will we actually show that we really can understand the information, that we can take quality photographs and convey meaning in our photographs. Remember the first thing I told you, I don't care. No one cares that you can take a pretty picture of a flower or some wonderful pictures of some butterfly. People stop at what makes them think, and that is your objective. It's always been your objective from the jump in this class. It just took us 9 weeks to get to the point to where I can say, now tell me something to think. Give me another meaning behind just this little pretty picture. Okay, so I want you guys to, again, look through, get some ideas of some things that relate to everyone, and explore your narrative. Explore having fun with Photoshop, anything that you guys want to do. If you need the photo shoot room because some of you might like that backdrop, that's completely fine too. You'll just need to schedule that with me. Okay? I love you guys so much. I'm so glad that you're in my class. And again, Ohana, happy shooting, and I want some amazing narratives by you. Bye.